Welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. Today our guest is Robert Litwak. Rob is a Senior Vice President and Director of International Security Studies at the Wilson Center, and he joins us on the occasion of our 50th birthday. Happy birthday to us.
Yes.
Rob, I should tell our viewers we are recording this discussion on Wednesday, October 24th. 50 years ago today, the Wilson Center officially was founded.
Extraordinary. The backstory is that President Kennedy signed the Wilson Memorial Act in 1961, and later Senator Moynihan was then a staff person working for Kennedy. There'd been an idea percolating that the United States should properly memorialize our 28th president, and there were different proposals, and I think it was early consensus that the standard kind of statue on the mall would not be appropriate. They would create a living memorial. So Moynihan was the navigator, I think, of the Memorial Act with President Kennedy. It led to a commission, and then 50 years ago, to this day, the act was approved by Congress.
And what year did you join the center?
I came to the center in 1983 out of a postdoc program, and in a fortuitous meeting with Sam Wells, who then ran our security studies program.
And who's still affiliated with the center.
Still affiliated, and offered me a position. And even in my peer group, I'm unusual that I've been at one institution for 35 years. But that's no accident, because I believe in the mission of the Wilson Center, which is to serve as a bridge between the academy and other professions and public policy.
Talk about how that works. I mean, I understand the jargon, but what do we actually do, and how does it create that bridge? Well,
it was fitting that we would memorialize our 28th president through this living institution that serves as a bridge, because Wilson, of course, was president of the United States and president of Princeton. Interesting footnote, as I learned from a Wilson biographer during World War I, while he was fighting that war, he was still having nightmares about faculty meetings at Princeton. So that's a comment perhaps on the academy. But our founding father, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, that how you think about the world affects how you act in the world. And that it's critical to get the right set of assumptions and have the historical context in place so that decision makers can better construct policies. That's the value proposition of the Wilson Center. We are nonpartisan. We are a public-private partnership. We receive a federal appropriation. We raise private funds. What we do, I would describe as policy hygiene. Not telling people what to do, but how to think about an issue.
Expand on that. That's really an interesting concept. So other think tanks, and we've embraced that designation in recent years, will go as far as advocating for specific pieces of policy. The Wilson Center doesn't do that. But so explain this hygiene role.
Well, there's been a proliferation of think tanks in Washington in the 35 years I've been in the town and at Wilson. The Wilson Center, because we receive federal funds, we are all think tanks assert nonpartisanship, but we are emphatically nonpartisan because of this public trust in our funding, and it's reinforced through our governance structure. So that if someone comes to the Wilson Center on whatever the vital issues of the day, they can be assured that the conclusions are not going to be pre-cooked. We would have represented at the table all of the respective viewpoints that a reasonable person would say, this defines what the poles of the debate on this issue are. We wouldn't have a Holocaust denier, we wouldn't have a flat earther, but you come in and you know that you're going to hear the diverse perspectives, and it's going to be left to you as the consumer, so to speak, to draw your own conclusion. And that approach is reflected across the board in our work. I think, just to, you asked me to expand on, I think as I look back with some perspective on this institution and how Washington works, I think it's the case that as a society we've suffered when an inadequate conceptualization of a foreign policy issue takes hold, and it can have trillion-dollar downstream consequences just by not upfront thinking analytically through what are the assumptions that drive policy. For example, in my field, I've worked on the issue of rogue states, which I'll put in air quotes on TV, It's a problematic concept, and it really, the connotation is that of essentially a crazy state beyond the pales of rationality and deterrence. Well, that's a huge going-in assumption if you're dealing with Iraq, Iran, North Korea, etc. We unpack these assumptions as a basis for sound decision-making. And in essentially what we do, if I had to put it into kind of a one sentence, I'd say we provide policymakers with the analytical tools, history, and regional context to improve decision-making.
That was great. You were vetting your own assumption in real time there, the Rogue Nation assumption.
Yeah.
And speaking of those policy makers, explain the Wilson Center's relationship to Congress. There's often a misperception that we're a government institution, a government agency, and it's not quite accurate. Could you explain the actual situation?
Well, we receive federal appropriated funds that are allocated by the Congress, and they are one of our sort of key constituents. We shape our work, by which I mean we make expert analysis intelligible to broader audiences so that busy policymakers will have the information in a format that's user-friendly that they can take into account as they make, deliberate on policies. And often that's our regional and country expertise that we have. So if a member of Congress is interested, or a committee on the future of U.S. relations with China, Russia, you name the country, we have comprehensive geographical coverage at the Wilson Center through our programs and through our residential fellows. This is a resource that the Congress and others, the public in general, can tap. We have experts here, and they are doing expert analysis, but we've made as a criterion for selection of fellows and as a criterion for how we think about our work, making it accessible to broader audiences, getting it into the public space. And if I can offer the compliment, you've been a key part of that through your activities and your colleagues through a program such as this, of taking complex issues and then not dumbing them down, but making them accessible, because a lot of times with jargon and everything, people hide behind expertise. Most issues can be reduced put in terms that lay people can understand, and they need to understand it because we need an informed citizenry.
I think Albert Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing, said something like, make everything as simple as possible, but not too simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Congressional Budget Office comes to mind as you talk about the Wilson Center, a resource that sort of lives in a space detached from the partisan passions of the day.
Yeah. That type of organization. There are others. I mean, there's the Congressional Research Service, CRS, that does studies. There's a lot of good information out there. There's I think in the vernacular of the day, there's a competition for eyeballs. You want them to focus on your web page or whatever. So we're in a crowded market, and we really have to present a high quality product that is relevant to the needs of the consumers so that they will kind of pay attention.
If you visit our website right now, wilsoncenter.org, you'll find information related to our 50th anniversary, including an interview with Sam Wells, who you referenced, a timeline. I'm interested in Rob Litwak's personal timeline, sort of the things we haven't talked about this in advance, so if you need a minute to think about it, I'll vamp for you. But when you think back of your time at the Wilson Center, what are some high water marks that were meaningful to you and you thought, this is the Wilson Center in action at its best?
The center has gone through an evolution in the 35 years I've been here. When I arrived, I would say we were doing, as was originally conceived, we were an institute of advanced study in the social sciences and humanities. I think the first landmark to me was sort of the honing of that mission to make it more relevant and timely for the period in which we existed. And that was to ensure that the projects and our activities here were fitting to a memorial for our 28th president. So if we got a proposal in on Byzantine history, we would direct it to Dumbarton Oaks or to the National Humanities Center. We honed our criteria for selection to ensure that we were still a scholarly institution, but that we were policy relevant. And that occurred I would say between the late 80s and the mid 90s, making policy relevance a criterion for our activities. Then a next kind of landmark to me was the expansion of our programmatic structure. If you look at our founding legislation, the only activity that's designated in there is that we would have residential fellows. During the tenure of our director, James Billington, we starting with the Kennan Institute in 1974, developing programs focused on different parts of the world, and then we added over time some thematic programs. So these are the two engines of activity at the Wilson Center. Our residential fellows that come in through our open international competition, and we don't direct the research. We tell them, the applicants apply to us with independent research on topics that fit within the parameters of our strategic plan. The other engine of activity, the programs, they take advantage of the Wilson Center's nonpartisan status to serve a convocation function. They bring experts together. We have a power of convening because we've earned this reputation of not pre-cooking conclusions. We can convene people and they know that they can come for an honest exchange. So I think the expansion of our program structure, and then the third piece would be the alignment of our programs and fellows. I mean, I don't want to get too inside baseball, for fairly honest, but in the current era, the work that our residential fellows perform is aligned with the work of our fellows, our programs. So we get a synergy between them. And then the final engine activity is represented by you and your colleagues, which is we have invested in dissemination through external relations, programs such as this, so that we're blasting out in user-friendly formats the products of our research.
And for those of you who'd like to see what that looks like, if you come to the Wilson Center website and you hover over the research tab, you'll see a listing of all of those programs with either thematic or regional focus that Rob was just describing. And one of the elements of that you talked about is the scholars who come to us from around the world, something that distinguishes this place from other places. Talk to us a bit about that population, who these people are and what they bring to the Wilson Center's work.
It's a remarkable group. It's an alumni over 5,000 from around the world. The Wilson Center has one of the largest, probably the largest in Washington certainly, and one of the largest in America, if not globally, of residential fellows. Each year on the order of 120 fellows pass through the Wilson Center, some for short term, some for a full academic year. Half of our fellows come from abroad. So through our fellowship program, we bring the world to Washington. And that reflects our optic on policy. We're not looking at take the Iran nuclear issue or whatever it might be. It's not, the perspective is not Washington looking out. It's like, how does Iran view the Iran nuclear crisis? How do countries, what is the perspective on these issues from outside? That's part of our value proposition to tell members of Congress or officials in the administration or journalists or the general public, here's how the issue is viewed from outside looking in. A number of our fellows have been involved in the development of civil society within their countries, and that has put them on the line. We've had some arrested in two instances. Fellows, one prospective and one alumna, were murdered for their activities. The case just in the last several weeks of Jamal Khashoggi from Saudi Arabia. He had not come to the Wilson Center, but we had offered him a fellowship, and we were just working out the visa issue to have him come and be in residence. So this ain't just a social science experiment for a lot of these fellows. They go back to their countries and get engaged in the development of civil society, and we ensure that the policy work we do, that it's scholarly, and I think the phrase I'd use is policy relevant scholarship. That's really our hallmark here.
So here, on the occasion of our 50th birthday, I should say the center's 50th birthday, we're younger than that, of course. My first foray into fake news. But on this occasion, looking ahead to the next 50 years, the relevance question. We've used the phrase, it's a bit hackneyed about more important today than ever before based on the current context, but one reason that phrases reoccur is because they do have some meaning. What about the Wilson Center today and moving forward?
I think that the value proposition, I mean, it is a tagline, never more important than today. Well, what does that mean? It means that we're facing major changes, tectonic shifts potentially in the international system. The rise of China, an authoritarian, assertive Russia, questions about the future of the European Union and economic integration of that kind, or whether countries will revert back to kind of more nationalistic, insular policies. What is this world going to look like within a broader context of global, indeed planetary challenges such as climate change? So that the importance of careful, clear, sober conceptualization of issues, where the assumptions that drive policy are not kind of reflecting some ideological predilection or unarticulated or just a vain hope. If they take root and you have an inadequate conceptualization, I mean, in other words, flawed assumptions driving policy choices, the consequences, I mean, it's literally the case of trillion-dollar downstream consequences. So I wouldn't make grandiose notions that the Wilson Center is changing the world, having an impact on policy. We have to be modest in what one can expect. That said, there is a market and a need for the type of work that's done here. I think this is the importance, the value proposition of the Wilson Center. It's one that the people who work here are dedicated to, and in my case, to use the old Pravda formulation, it's no accident that I spent 35 years here.
I think you're being a little humble when you say, when it's not just trillions of dollars. Life and death is sometimes on the line as well if you don't get these assumptions right. Rob, for me, I did my previous work as a broadcast journalist in a more political environment where you're talking about the politics of the day, and there's a lot of shooting from the hip. It's great to be in a place where you learn something new every day from people like you, and thank you for that opportunity.
And wonderful colleagues such as you. Thank you very much, John.
Rob, thanks. And if you'd like more on the Wilson Center and its 50 years, or just today and tomorrow, visit us at wilsoncenter.org. And thanks for watching this program, or if you're listening via the podcast, for joining us.